Truth Espresso, episode 141.
Face it, we all would rather sleep in this morning. That's why God gave us espresso, to kickstart our zombified corpses into hyperdrive. And now, giving your mind and soul the morning shot of truth it craves. This is Truth Espresso with Daniel Minnick.
Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of Truth Espresso Express. This is your host, Daniel Minnick, and I am on my way to work on this Thursday morning. And as this episode airs, it should be Friday. Last week on Truth Espresso Express, we talked about an overview of Galatians, one of the earliest epistles of the Apostle Paul. And we went over the first half, the first 3 chapters of Galatians. And so I was studying the book of Galatians again last night. And so I want to go over the second half of the book of Galatians, because the book of Galatians is a very important doctrinal epistle from Paul early on in his ministry, and it recognizes the strong influence of the law salvation people. So the Apostle Paul, who grew up as a Judaizer, basically himself, and zealously persecuted the church, as he mentioned in Galatians chapter 1, was confronted by Jesus on the road to Damascus, Jesus from heaven, and then Paul is given the gospel to preach to the nations, and the Apostle Paul, by revelation from Jesus Christ and his study of the Old Testament, the prophecies, realized that the gospel itself is not antithetical to the law, but that the law served a purpose. And he mentions in chapter 3 that the law could not disannul the command, the law could not disannul the promise that God gave to Abraham, and that it was given because of transgressions, and that it was going to be there until the promised seed should come. And that promised seed is Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ is the one who fulfilled the law on our behalf. Now, the Apostle Paul elsewhere also mentions, he isn't anti-law. He just recognizes the purpose that the law served and currently does serve. As you see the evangelical methods of Ray Comfort in The Way of the Master, you see that the law, as the Apostle Paul said in Galatians chapter 3, is our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. And so the law is holy. The law currently does serve a purpose, and the law reflects the morality of God. So as Christians, we don't discard the law. In fact, we follow the morality of the law expressed in the law, but we recognize that even the ceremonial and civic aspects of the law, whether or not they apply to nations or Christians today, they still reflect the holiness of God. And so the Apostle Paul wasn't against the law for that purpose. He was against the idea that you have to keep the law, the written ceremonial law of God, including circumcision, to be right with God, to be saved. And he understands that that is against the gospel. And so we move on to chapter 4 of the epistle to the Galatians. And Paul begins there after talking about the promise of Abraham in the previous chapter, how those in Christ are children of Abraham. He now in chapter 4 expresses our relationship to the law. Those who have received the gospel, we can understand how we relate to the law. and how we relate to the law as God revealed it, as God intended it in progressive revelation. And he describes this relationship to the law as we are children of the King. Like, we are heirs to the throne, but as children, as we're growing up as children, we don't wield the power of the throne. We, just as really any other citizen or as a servant, a young child, before he assumes any position of authority, is similar to a servant. He has to learn in school and be graded, and a mere servant of the King who functions as the schoolmaster and in effect has the authority over the prince himself to discipline him, to school him, to grade him. So even a servant there has the authority over the son of the King to tutor him and to instruct him. And that's what the Apostle Paul is describing our relationship with the law, because he said that the law is our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. So the law serves as a purpose to educate us about God, about his ways, and to point us to Christ. So even if we as God's called are children of the King, and we have that kingly position promised to us, we are still in bondage until we understand, until we mature and realize just what the purpose of that law is, to instruct us and bring us to Christ. Proper education requires that the princely child be treated no differently from any other child. But the Apostle Paul mentions, in the fullness of times, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law. Now remember, I'm driving to work, and so anything I remember from Scripture will come from my memory, but that passage is one that I use a lot when I'm arguing with people over the truth of the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And so that Paul's point of that is eschatological, to show that the fullness of times has been fulfilled in Christ, and that's how we are no longer under the covenant of the law. But I want to point out here when he says that God sent forth his Son born of a woman. So he's born of a virgin woman, but the fact that he's born of a woman shows that he's just as human as a woman. And in fact, born under the law also points to the fact that he is truly fully human. Now, not only fully human, but he is fully human. He doesn't lack anything that would be characteristic of the human nature apart from the sin that has corrupted the progeny of Adam. So when it comes to ontology, Jesus Christ is every bit as human as we are. Even as God has miraculously provided him through the virgin birth, whatever God had to do to ensure that miracle of virgin conception and being born of the virgin allows him to be fully human. He is, because he could not be born under the law if he were not fully human, because the law was given to humanity. As we are created in the image of God, we reflect God, we are obligated to show forth God in our lives, and so the morality of God is given to us, created in his image, and Jesus Christ, to redeem us, had to be fully human, as the Apostle Paul says, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem them that are under the law. That shows that Christ is indeed God among us, Emmanuel. He is fully God, but he's also fully human, fully subject to the law, because if he were, a goat, as the epistle of the Hebrews says, the blood of bulls and goats could not take away sin, but God said sacrifices and offerings he did not desire, but a body has prepared for me, the Son. And so, yes, Jesus Christ was indeed fully human. He had a full human body and full human spirit. He had the entirety of the human nature to be under the law of God to redeem them that are under the law. And how did he do that? Well, he had to live a perfect life, be the perfect scapegoat, the perfect Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. He had to live a perfect life so that then he could be innocent and then bear all the sins of the elect in his body on the tree. He had to bear the sins of humanity, those who would be saved, in his body on the tree. And then by the resurrection, according to Romans chapter 1, it proved that he was the Son of God in glory. So that's a lot about this. Born of a woman, born under the law to redeem them under the law, fully human. He was made a human child while still retaining his full divinity, and he fulfilled the law so that he would be the rightful heir of all things. So there is a covenant between the Father and the Son. And, as the Father is the one who's made known as Yahweh in the Old Testament, the Son is the one who makes the Father known by the revelation of the incarnation. And then the Father makes the Son Christ. He anoints him as Christ. He makes him fully Lord. He puts all things under his feet, and he reigns until his enemies are made a footstool. And then when the end comes, he delivers the kingdom to the Father. So there's this inter-Trinitarian covenant with the Father and the Son by which God is revealed to humanity via progressive revelation of the law and the fulfillment of the law and salvation, the covenant of redemption there. And so that has, as how Paul recognizes the revelation of Jesus Christ. And so Jesus Christ becomes heir of all things. And then we, as Paul expresses, we're under the bondage of the law until we become heirs through the gospel, and we become heirs through Christ. As Christ is heir, we are joint heirs with Christ. And then, let's see, so toward the end of chapter 4, Paul explains this further. He wants to demonstrate how the Old Testament prophesies this, the fullness of times, but he gives the analogy of Hagar and Sarah. So Sarah is the one through whom the promise comes, but Abraham, with his lack of faith, wanting to understand things, fleshly speaking, like, okay, I need an heir, so let's do the fleshly means of, my ability to get an heir. And so that reflects the understanding, the Judaizers' understanding of the covenant of the law, that they are in bondage to Hagar, the covenant of Hagar, in Arabia, the covenant of Hagar, but then the promise of the gospel is through Sarah, that the miraculous promise that God would provide the seed through Sarah, that she should have a son, and we know that seed was Jesus ultimately. And Paul says that we, as Isaac, are children of promise. But those who are seeking to be in bondage under the law, they are the children of Hagar. It's an analogy, but it aptly explains the understanding of those who would be in bondage to the law for their salvation, and those who understand the promise that the law could not disannul, that the law was given for transgressions until the seed should come who would fulfill the law and provide the gospel, and we would be joint heirs with him, and be allowed to have the blessings of Abraham by faith. And Abraham was justified by faith before the covenant of circumcision. And then Paul mentions the prophecy in Isaiah that the desolate, there would be more children of the desolate than there are of the bondwoman. And he mentions from Genesis about cast out the bondwoman and her children, for she will not be heirs with the one of promise, essentially. So then quickly move on to chapter 5. Paul challenges us, if I remember, stand fast in the liberty wherewith Christ has made you free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. And he really lambasts the Judaizers and warning the Galatians about the idea that circumcision doesn't profit you anything. It's not circumcision that makes you right. God had a purpose for circumcision, but it wasn't doing this act saves your soul. And he says that if one practices circumcision, if one truly holds to circumcision, then he's a debtor to keep the whole law. And he's not saying if you happen to have been circumcised, now you're bound to keep the whole law. He's talking about those who believe that and teach that circumcision is necessary, that to be consistent, you must keep the whole law. And because then he also says circumcision and uncircumcision, neither of them matter, but faith working through love. And yes, I hear a lot of Roman Catholics try to take that to talk about their understanding of the gospel being a life of kind of faith living out by good works. And when they try to explain it to us, Protestants, it's not completely false, but they have the cart before the horse. They don't understand that it's not us doing the works that contributes in any way to our salvation. It is faith alone that saves, but the faith that saves produces works. So then Paul, at the end of Galatians 5, remember the very well-known passage of the fruit of the Spirit. So Paul then does warn the Galatians, discarding the requirement of keeping these outward ordinances of the law. He does say that, be not deceived, don't be doing these bad works here. Someone who does these evil things demonstrate that they're not heirs of the kingdom, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. And there is no law that forbids these things, but the fruit of the Spirit are these things, and none of these things are things that you would check off on an outward list of ordinances. They are characteristics of one who has the Spirit of God. So Paul is demonstrating that Christians have demonstrate their faith through love and joy and peace and things like that. Not outward ordinances like circumcision and things like that. These are not the things that save at all. But the Spirit of God accompanies one who is saved by faith and produces the fruit of the Spirit. And now let's go on to the final chapter of Galatians, chapter 6. Then he admonishes those who are spiritual to restore one who's faltered, and then he gives, which I don't have enough time to explain much. It can be difficult to understand what Paul means when he says things that seem to contradict, like bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, and then he a few verses later says, for everyone will bear his own burden, which, I think it's like, help each other out, in the context of one who's faltered, restore him, so help each other out, constantly provoke each other to love and good works. And, so always seek to try to, provoke each other to continue to live the faith, but each one bear his own burdens. Well, yeah, everyone will get his own reward or get, see his own work burned up, as 1 Corinthians 3 talks about. So that's what Paul means with one will bear his own burdens, is because, each one is indeed accountable for his own actions, but as the body, we should be trying to provoke each other and helping each other where they can. So then he talks about the law of sowing and reaping on that account, and then he has another criticism for the Judaizers in the vein there where they compel you to be circumcised, but they don't really keep the law themselves. And then once again he says that circumcision and uncircumcision don't matter, but those who walk according to the rule that neither of those states actually matter. Peace and blessing be upon them and upon the Israel of God. And I'm getting close to work, so if you're really hoping for me to really get into Galatians 6:16, well, not this time, and I'm saved by the bell on that one, huh? But, Paul then concludes Galatians chapter 6 that, he talks about bearing in his body the marks of Jesus Christ, like his life is proof that he's living according to his convictions and the rule, because he gives the gospel both to Jews and Gentiles and gives the truth regardless of how they take it. So there we go. That is this episode of Truthspresso Express, and so stay tuned for more episodes of Truthspresso and Truthspresso Express.
Thank you for waking up with Truthspresso. Good morning, and God bless your day.
Hey friends, Daniel Minnick here again. If you liked waking up to this episode of Truthspresso, I would really appreciate it if you would rate it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or whatever application you use to listen to Truthspresso.